Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome to day 29 of Russian Through Propaganda. Today we're going to learn how to boss people around in Russian using the imperative. So these are new forms of uh, the Russian verb that we've seen already in our tables. I've mentioned this several times that under the conjugated forms, as you've probably noticed beneath the black line, I've been giving you these forms that we haven't really been using. And we mentioned at some point in passing that those are imperative forms. And so far they've just been there for just sort of for reference. And maybe you've taken a look at them and maybe gotten some idea of what they look like. Today we're finally going to discuss how they're actually formed. And so today we're worried mostly about simply forming them. Tomorrow we'll talk more about how to use them, and we'll look at a couple of related construction, other ways to give people orders or to suggest that someone do something, or to say things like "let me do something" and those types of things. This is another tricky topic because, again, as we know by now, Russian verbs are very complex. There is a pretty wide variety of different verb types, and they all behave a little bit differently. And so that also is reflected in the imperative. At the end of the day, the best way to approach the imperative is to learn how each verb type works, right? So many of them are similar. We'll see that later. But anyway, at least, especially with the major verb types that we've seen already, right? You can simply learn what the imperative looks like for each particular verb type and how that works. But before we take that approach, we're going to learn a step-by-step method that's good for beginners and also for down the road if you're using kind of a tricky verb that you may have to kind of think a bit, what is the imperative going to be? This little step-by-step method will almost always get you the correct form. Now, of course, this is a bit of a crutch, right? Because needless to say, you don't want to be sitting there going through a step-by-step method every time you want to use an imperative in Russian. So this is just kind of a very a method for beginners, and then later maybe for if you need to reflect on something, maybe double check a form. This step-by-step method will work for the vast majority of Russian imperatives, but not all, right? So we'll be careful to point out a couple of cases where this method would not get you the form that's actually used in Russian. Okay, so if we look at a quick poster, we'll see an example of of an imperative form of a verb we've just been looking at, учиться, right, which means to learn or to study, right? We see here пионер, учись сражаться за дело рабочего класса, learn to struggle or fight for the дело, which in this case means sort of cause, the cause of the working class, genitive. Учись сражаться за дело рабочего класса. Okay, so this form учись is a form we're going to refer to as the ты imperative, meaning that's the way you would give a command to someone you would address using ты. Now, in this case, we're talking to this little kid, right? So we're not going to show him a whole lot of respect. Again, maybe he hasn't earned it yet, but right. So if you're talking to small children, you would use a ты. You would use ты generally in most cases, including the imperative, right? So учись is a ты imperative. Now, this is a bit tricky because we have the reflexive particle on the end of that, but here as elsewhere, right? Once we have whatever verb form we need, we're going to form that regularly as we would for any verb. And then if it happens to have a reflexive particle, we're going to tack the particle on at the end, right? So the imperative forms are no different. Let's ignore the reflexive particle for a moment. The ты imperative for the verb учить, right, meaning to teach, without the particle would be учи. Okay, and again, that's the ты imperative. Okay, so you may be wondering, how would you give a command to someone you would address using вы, right? And that could be to a single person you're being formal with, or to multiple people, regardless of the degree of formality. Okay, the good news is that whatever the ты imperative happens to be, we get the вы imperative by adding те. And there are no exceptions to that rule. It doesn't matter how crazy the ты imperative may look or whatever, just simply add те to the end and you get your вы imperative. In this case, that would be учите, учите. Okay, that would mean, hey, you, вы, teach, right, giving a command. Now, if we want to say study or learn or whatever, we need to attach the reflexive particle on at the end. We're dealing with учите, which ends in a vowel, so we simply add soft s and we get учитесь. Okay, so there we have our two imperative forms for the verb учиться. Учись, right? That's the T form we saw in the poster. And then we just created the V form, учитесь, the V imperative. Okay, so let's look now at this step-by-step method. To use this, we're starting with the они form of the verb. Right now, it's not, by the way, that these imperatives actually derive from the они form of the verb. They're simply a correspondence here, right? So you shouldn't think that this is explaining what the imperative form actually is. We may talk about that a bit more in a moment. But again, this is just a practical step-by-step way for producing that form. So if we start with the они form, we get, for example, from делать, we get делают. Okay, so the first step is to remove the third plural ending. In this case, that is ute, right? We want to get rid of that ending. We don't need that here. And once we do that, we look at what we're left with. And we're going to have actually three possibilities. The first one here with делать is the simplest. If we remove the ending and we're left with something ending in a vowel, then we're on easy street. We simply add an и краткое, and that gives us our T imperative. For example, делай, meaning do, right? Hey, you, T, do, right? So that's our informal T command. Now, as we know, to get the V form, the polite version, or the version to give a command to multiple people, we simply add tie. We don't have to think one moment when adding this. And that gives us делайте. Okay, as you might guess, to give a negative command, right, we simply negate this form using не, the way we would any other verb form. Very simple. Не делай, right, don't do, whatever, or the V equivalent, не делайте. Okay, so if we look at this for a moment, we see something that's rather curious, right? What we've produced using this step-by-step method, which is, of course, it's highly artificial. No Russian would ever do this. They just simply know the forms. So what is that делай form? Well, it's actually the stem of the verb, right? We see now that we're not calling these verbs I verbs just by pure whim or something, right? This actually is telling us something about the way the verb was built. Quite often we don't actually see an I kratkaya because we add other things to that and the I kratkaya drops out, right? We get делаю, делаешь, etc. But now all of a sudden we see that this I isn't something we've just made up, right? It is actually the stem of the verb. And we'll see that for many types today, the imperative is the stem of the verb, right? With no ending added to it at all. And that does occur in certain other European languages, like, by the way, in English, go, or the German of that would be gay, right? From gayen, right? So no infinitive ending, no nothing. Okay, so anyway, if you studied other languages, you may ask yourself how their imperatives are built. But anyway, we'll see several examples today where the imperative is indeed just the bare stem of the vowel. Okay, so let's go on and look at the two other possibilities. Писать. Okay, so let's make an imperative. Let's start with the они form. That would be пишут. We drop the ut, right? We drop that ending. We're left with пиш. Okay, so now we're left with a form ending not in a vowel, but in a consonant. Okay, so if we're left with a consonant, we've got one more thing to think about. We've got an extra step. Namely, we've got to think about stress. And again, this is just simply a correspondence. It's not that this is coming from the ya form. It just simply mirrors the ya form. What is the stress in the ya form? Pishu, right? That ya form is in stressed. Okay, so if we have that pishu, we add to our little form pish, we add a stressed e, right? Pishi. Hey, you, right. Pishi, V form is pishite. And again, listen carefully to the correspondence. Pishu, I write, gives pishi, right? Pishu, pishi. And again, if we negate that, it would be не пиши, не пишите. Let's look at one more and then we'll compare even more carefully. Ответить. Okay, keep in mind we can just look at that infinitive and tell that that's a stem stressed infinitive everywhere, right? The infinitive has stress already on the stem. It's not going to move anywhere. Anyway, we get our ini form. That would be ответит. We drop the yat, right? We drop our ending. We're left again with a consonant. So we have to think, what is the stem stress? What is the stress in the ya form of the verb? Again, we know simply by looking at the infinitive that the ya form is also going to be stem stressed, right? That would give us отвечу. Отвечу would be our ya form. Again, stem stress. Okay, so that suggests that we're going to add to ответ simply a soft sign. That gives us ответь, ответь. Now вы, we simply add те, and we get ответьте, ответьте. That can be a little hard to say at first. Ответьте, ответьте. We negate it, не ответь, не ответьте. Okay, so let's look one more time at the stress patterns, and hopefully you can pick up on this fairly well as you're hearing it. Пишу, that's the end stress pattern. Пишу gives пиши, but отвечу gives ответь, right? Пишу, пиши, but отвечу, ответь. Okay, so anyway, refer back to this chart as we're going forward if you need to kind of catch your breath and look more carefully at how we're forming these imperatives. Let's look at several types here, and let's break these down first to the examples in 29a, which are easy in the sense that we're not going to need that extra step, right? So for these types, when we go through the step-by-step thing, we're going to be left with a vowel, and we're not going to have to worry about stress. Okay, so this already will help us begin to distinguish between certain verb types that are going to be a bit trickier and those here in 29a that are relatively easy. Okay, so let's start with сделать. Now again, once you've done one I verb, you pick up on what the deal is, and it becomes very easy, very quickly to just simply spit out the imperative for the I verb without even thinking about it. But let's think at least, what is the ini form? At least we'll get practice reviewing our conjugations, and we'll do this somewhat carefully. Okay, они сделают. By the way, that's the perfective verb. It's the perfective of делать, but by the way, just as we saw with conjugation, the aspect of a given verb isn't going to affect how we're forming the imperative, right? It doesn't affect conjugation, doesn't affect these imperative forms either. So if we do this step by step, we would get они сделают, drop the ют, add и краткое, and we get ты сделай, сделай. Okay, so because the V form is so easy, we're not really maybe going to give that with every example. Just simply add те, right? So to сделай, you'd add те and get сделайте. Again, there are no exceptions to that rule. Okay, let's take отвечать, another I verb. Они отвечают, drop the ют, we're left with a, that gives us отвечай, отвечай. Okay, already you can formulate your own rule for I verbs, right? If we're taking a type by type approach, right? I verbs have imperatives ending in I. Okay, let's look at some ova verbs like танцевать. Remember, ova collapses to u. That would give us они танцуют. Drop the ют. We're left with u, right? With a vowel, we add и краткое, and we get танцуй. Танцуй, or вы танцуйте, танцуйте. Okay, попробовать, right? Telling someone to try something. Они попробуют, drop the ют. Again, that gives us ты попробуй, попробуй. Okay, now we can formulate a rule for ova, right? They're going to take imperatives in uj, uj. Right? Because again, the ova is collapsing to u, and then if we're using the step-by-step method, we're adding i kratke to it. Now note the pronunciation there that sometimes gives students a bit of trouble. Tansuj, uj, right? Or paprobuj, uj. Okay, иметь. Remember, ye verbs often look a lot like I verbs. We just have a ye instead of an a. Они имеют, right? They have. Они имеют. Drop the ют. We're left with a ye. We add и краткое. We get имей. Имей. Петь. Now this one is a bit tricky perhaps. Ой, that's an ой verb. Они поют. Поют. We drop the ют. We're left with о, which is a vowel. We add и краткое, right, if we're going through the step-by-step method, and that gives us poi, poi. Okay, so we see here yet another type that whose imperative form is simply the stem of the verb, right? So poi. Okay, so now we can already formulate a rule for oi verbs. Their imperatives are going to end in oi. So without even thinking further, we could go through the next several examples, right? To tell someone to wash, помыть, that would be помой. To tell someone open, открой. To close would be закрой. Okay, could you make the V imperatives for those? Помойте, откройте, закройте. Again, simply adding the tie. Now, the imperfective for close, right, would be закрывать. That would give an imperative, right? We're back to the I pattern. Закрывай, закрывай. And we'll talk more about the aspectual difference in imperatives tomorrow, but you may already maybe ask yourself, what would the difference be? Try to take a guess, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow. Here's some, we're going to get some good advice today. Не отдыхай на рельсах. Don't relax on train tracks. That's just some good advice. Okay, so let's look at some more verbs. And we have a variety of different verb types, but these are all going to fall under the tricky category, right? Because if we do the step-by-step method, we're going to have to worry about stress. Now, keep in mind that we say that, look at the ya form stress. In rare cases, that may be utterly necessary, but keep in mind that we can usually just simply look at the infinitive itself, right? And if the infinitive is in-stressed, we know that the ya form will also be in-stressed, right? If the infinitive is stem-stress, right, then we know that the ya form will also be stem-stressed. So for a lot of verb types, this is a little bit easier than it sounds because you don't really have to think about the ya form necessarily. Okay, but we'll talk more about that as we encounter examples. Let's start with сказать. Okay, let's be a bit more careful with these. Они скажут, right? The a verbs are getting the mutations everywhere. Они скажут. Okay, we drop the ut, we're left with the consonant, je, right? So we've got to think about the extra step, right? Where's the stress on the ya form? Okay, now if we look at сказать, we see that the infinitive is in-stressed, so that's going to imply скажу, right? Now keep in mind, it's going to be скажу whether or not the rest of the verb is in-stressed or shifting stress, right? That's, again, with the ya form, we can be confident about where its stress will be. So anyway, я скажу, okay, that implies скажи, right? Скажу, in stress, that means we're adding a stressed E to get our imperative, скажи. Okay, again, this takes a bit of practice maybe. Listen to the pattern. Скажу, скажи. Okay, look at another one. Спросить. Они спросят. We drop the yat. We're left with a consonant. Sпрос. Okay, so we have to think about stress. Okay, look at the infinitive. Спросить. It's stressed on the final syllable. That means that regardless of its stress pattern, the ya form is going to be sпрошу, sпрошу. It's definitely going to be in-stressed. So sпрошу implies спроси, спроси. Okay, remember, a common mistake is to say something like спроси, right? But remember, we're adding the stressed E onto that remnant of our они form, right? So we're taking sпрос. Then the question is, what do we add to that? Well, we think about the stress, спрошу, in stress. So we add the stressed E back to sпрос, and that gives us the imperative sprosi, right? Ask. Okay, now here's example number 3. We have something different. Приготовить. Okay, note the stress is back on the stem. Step by step, они приготовят. They will prepare or they will cook. Приготовят. We drop the yat. We're left with a v. So we've got to think about stress. Я приготовлю. Right? Now again, we know that the ya form is going to be stem stress simply by looking at the infinitive in this case. Я приготовлю. Right? So now we're simply adding a soft sign to our base that gives us приготовь. Приготовь. By the way, that final soft v is reduced to a soft f. Приготовь. Okay, сидеть. Они сидят. Drop the yat. We're left with seat. Okay. Now the ya form is going to be sijou, right? In stressed. Sijou implies sidi, right? You sit. That actually means to be seated. So this would imply telling someone to remain sitting, right? To be in a sitting position. We're not going to talk about these so-called verbs of position in full detail until book 4, believe it or not. We have so much else to talk about, but anyway, we will cover those in full, in depth, near the very beginning of book 4, actually. Anyway, отдохнуть. Okay, so let's tell someone to relax. Они отдохнут. We drop the ut, we're left with an n. What would the ya stress be? Я отдохну. Okay, in stress, that suggests отдохни. Начать. Okay, that's rather funny verb type. Remember this non-syllabic root ending in an n. Они начнут. We drop the ut, we're left with nach, right? Nach. Okay, so we're left with a consonant. Let's think about stress. Okay, in stress, я начну. That implies начни. Next one, перестать. Okay, now here's one where the infinitive isn't that helpful, right? I mean, it's just simply looking at it, right? Перестать. You've got the stress pattern marked here. It's going to be stem stressed, right? So again, for certain types, you will have to think ultimately about the ya form, right? The infinitive itself won't really help you, right? So despite the fact that this infinitive is stressed on the final syllable, this verb is stem stressed throughout. So the они form would be перестанут, right? They will stop, they will cease. We drop the ut, we're left with the consonant n. We've got to think about the stress in the ya form. That would be перестану, right? Because this verb is stem stressed. So перестану, that tells us we need to add a soft sign, and that gives us the imperative перестань, right? Stop it, stop. Понять, another tricky verb type. Они поймут, they will understand. Я пойму, right? This is in stressed throughout. That gives us пойми, right? Understand, пойми. Жить, они живут. We drop the ut, we're left with a consonant v. Let's think about stress. In stress, я живу, that implies живи, right? Live. Звать, an sa verb, right? Remember that means two consonants in a non-syllabic root, right? Again, consisting of two consonants plus an a. That's how this infinitive was built, right? For example, звать, meaning to call, zve, right? That's our non-syllabic root, plus the a that we see there in the infinitive. Okay, this is an in-stressed verb. They call, we know that from like lesson 1, right, or something. Зовут, right? Они зовут. Как тебя зовут? Зовут, we drop ut, we're left with a v. What will the ya form be? Зову, right? In stress verb. Я зову, that implies зови, зови, right? Call. Okay, brać, another tricky NSA verb. Here we've got ber, that's our non-syllabic root, plus the a we see in the infinitive. And this one, you may recall, inserts a yeah, right? Some of these NSA verbs will introduce an or a yeah in between their, right in the middle of their non-syllabic root. So these NSA verbs are very tricky. Fortunately, there are not very many of them in the language. Okay, so они берут, right? They are taking. Okay, berut, we drop the ut, we're left with bier. Where's the stress on the ya form? Well, in stress, so that's biri. Biru, right? I am taking biru. That implies the imperative biri, biri. Okay, взять, there's the perfective verb for taking, and we see no verb tag there. Remember what that means. That means that this is an irregular verb, right? It's very unusual. We can't categorize it really. Now for this one, you just have to know the unusual stem, which is возьм, right? Они возьмут, meaning they will take. Возьмут, we drop the ut, we're left with возьм. And what's the ya stress? Я возьму in stress, that implies возьми, возьми. You see the little пословица скажи мне, кто твой друг, и я скажу, кто ты, right? With the imperative, tell me who your friend is, and I'll say who you are, right? Because birds of a feather flock together. Okay, let's now break these down and get some more practice by focusing on by grouping these verbs by type, right? So we've sort of talked about that already. We got some inkling of why that's so useful. Now let's just look at more examples and see if we, again, hopefully can move away a bit from thinking about the step-by-step method constantly and learning the imperative forms by type, and then falling back on the step-by-step rule if we're confused or we're dealing with some very tricky verb. Okay, so here are some I and ye verbs. Okay, these imperatives are going to look just like the stem, meaning they're going to end in I or ye, right? So делать gives делай, иметь gives имей, and with that, I think we can just go straight to the imperative, right? Читать gives читай, right? Read. Now remember, to get the v imperative, we would simply add те, that would give us читайте. Okay, now to tell someone read in the perfective, прочитать, прочитай. Right? Hey, read through that book. Read that whole book right now. Открывать, открывай. And a ye verb, уметь, умей. Right? We're telling someone to know how to do something, to be able to do something. Here's a fairly common Russian saying, не имей 100 рублей, а имей 100 друзей, right? Don't have 100 rubles, rather have 100 friends. Here's a poster with an I imperative, работай по-коммунистически, work like a communist, right? Work in the communist way, right? And by the way, you see there a по-коммунистически, that's on, following the same model as по-русски, right? In the Russian way. Here we have по-коммунистически, this kind of funny adverbial construction, meaning in the communist way, like a communist. Okay, let's look at some ova verbs like рисовать. We saw examples already that would give, for example, рисуй, right? Because the ova collapses to an u. So hopefully that pattern is easy to pick up on. Попробовать. So let's tell someone to try something. That would be попробуй, уй, right? Попробуй. The V form would be попробуйте. Okay, планировать, plan something. Планируй, планируй. Советовать, to advise or recommend or something. Советуй, советуй. Танцевать, to dance. Танцуй, танцуй. Потанцевать, which means to dance for a bit. That would be потанцуй, потанцуй. And игнорировать, can you guess what that means? That's another borrowing, right? And a borrowed ova verb. To ignore, right? So ignore something, that would be Игнорируй. Игнорируй. Если пословица не просит, не советуй, right? Literally, they're not asking, don't give advice, right? Don't give unwanted, unsolicited advice. And a poster with an ova imperative from the verb путешествовать, which means to travel, we get путешествуйте. There's the вы imperative, путешествуйте по горам Кавказа. Travel around the mountains of the Caucasus. By the way, garam is a dative plural, so we haven't seen that yet, but we do see the dative is being used after po, right, for movement around kind of an open space. Okay, let's look at some oi verbs. Let's start with the poster. Moi ruki, wash your hands. Okay, so myć, we know we call that an oi verb. We know that these oi verbs, their imperative form is simply the stem, which ends in oi. So there it is, moi, right? Wash your hands. Moi ruki после работы и перед едой. So wash your hands after work and before eating. Okay, so look at the pattern. Myć gives us moi. So these are also very easy. I don't think we need to even think about the они form. Помыть, the perfective, wash, gives us помой. Петь, to sing, would be пой, right? Sing, like sing me a song. Спеть, the perfective version of to sing, would be спой. And we've already done these. Close, like close the door, would be закрой, and open would be открой. Here's a funny пословица. Мной хоть полы мой, да не называй мочалкой. Okay, so our imperative here is мой, and we're saying мой полы, right? Wash the floors, right? The хоть here means like you can even go so far as to wash the floor with me. It's a little bit hard to translate that хоть. But mnoi is an instrumental, the instrumental case form of ya. We haven't studied the instrumental, but it's used for to tell with what we're doing something, to tell about instruments or tools and other things as well. So the idea is you can even wash the floors with me if you like. You can go so far as to literally wash the floors with me, but don't call me a washcloth, right? Не называй меня мочалкой. So there's another imperative, называй. That's from the verb nazivать, which is an I verb, meaning to call someone something. Okay, let's look at some a verbs like besides. Now here, these are going to be trickier, right? Because we're getting now into some verb types that will require us to think about the stress pattern. But again, for most of these types, it's enough really to look at the infinitive itself, right? We don't really need to think about the ya form in particular, except for certain types, right? So that's why we tell you as a general rule to look at the ya form. But again, on a practical level, often you can just look straight at the infinitive and see, is the stress on the final syllable or is it back on the stem? Okay, so again, we have two possibilities here. We can be adding a stressed E or a soft sign. Okay, so показать, that gives покажут. We dropped the ut, we're left with the consonant. Okay, so what's the stress? Well, показать suggests покажу, which in turn suggests покажи, покажи, show me something, покажи. Написать, the они form would be напишут. We drop the ut, we're left with напиш, напиш. Okay, so we got to think about the stress. Написать implies напишу, which in turn implies the imperative напиши, right? Write, like write a letter. Сказать, они скажут. So we drop the ut, we're left with скажь, я скажу, ты скажи. Okay, рассказать, by the way, this is just the same verb actually as сказать, just with a different prefix. Они расскажут, я расскажу, ты расскажи. Okay, here's a пословица involving the verb плакать, which means to cry, you may remember. Плачь, не плачь, а есть пить надо. Okay, kind of some folksy expressions here. Sometimes these proverbs can be a little bit hard to translate or even explain sometimes grammatically. They're often very peculiar. So basically, cry, don't cry. right? Two imperatives. Okay, so we would meaning cry or don't cry. Do whatever you want. You can cry or you can not cry, but in any case, you've got to eat and drink, right? And you've got this funny hyphenated infinitive, right? So you've got to eat and drink. Okay, here's a poster with an E verb. Kurit means to smoke, and this guy is telling us kurite sigarette, smoke cigarettes. Right? He doesn't give a damn what the doctors say. He thinks it's cool to smoke cigarettes. And by the way, for all the anti-alcoholism posters, you don't really see a whole lot of anti-smoking posters. You know, smoking was very prevalent. And still was extremely prevalent in Russia, you know, I don't know, 20, 15 years ago. I think it's taken a nosedive. I don't know the statistics, but you don't. Well, there've been certain prohibitions. It's become more difficult to just openly sell cigarettes. For example, at the cigarette stands in supermarkets they have a little kind of curtain they pull down over it, so you have to specifically ask for them before you can even see them. There's also, kind of like in the U.S., there have been prohibitions on smoking in certain public places. So anyway, you don't see nearly as much smoking there as you used to. Okay, anyway, so for E and ye verbs, they're going to require the extra step. So let's take верить. Now, here too, we can really look right at the infinitive. For these verb types, we don't really have to look at the ya form per se, because the infinitive is telling us what the ya stress will be anyway. So for example, верить, that's obviously stem stressed. That implies я верю, right? Which in turn implies the imperative вер, right? Верю, stem stressed, вер, right? Simply adding a soft sign. Получить, okay? Infinitive is stressed on the final syllable. That implies я получу, I will receive. Получу, which implies the imperative получи, right? Receive or take this. Купить, to buy. Okay, the ya form will be куплю. Now remember, we're not going to keep the mutation because if we had done the full step-by-step method, we would have started out with купит, dropped the yat, that leaves us with kup, right? So now the issue is, do we add an e or a soft sign? Because the ya stress is kuplю, we add the stressed e and we get kupi, right? Buy. And сидеть, we've done already. Я сижу, right? That implies сиди, right? Remember, we're starting with сидят. We drop the yat, we're left with seed, ending in a de. And because it's сижу, we add soft e, that gives us сиди. Сиди высоко, да плюй далеко. Sit high and spit far. Okay, let's look at a few more verbs, right? These are very common verb types, so it's worth practicing them quite a bit. Заплатить, right? Look at the stress. That implies заплачу, which in turn gives заплати, right? Pay. Любить, that implies люблю, which in turn gives us the imperative люби, right? Love. Попросить, that implies попрошу, right, with the in stress, and that gives us the imperative попроси, right, make a request, ask someone to do something. Позвонить, right, позвоню will be the я stress that gives us the imperative позвони. Приготовить, the ya form will be приготовлю, as we've already seen, приготовлю. Right, again, the infinitive itself is stressed back on the stem. So that gives us the imperative приготовь. Решить, я решу, that implies реши. Посмотреть, that gives us посмотрю, which in turn gives us посмотри, right? Look, hey, look at that, посмотри. Готовь сани летом, а телегу зимой. Prepare or ready your sleigh in summer and your wagon in winter, right? Plan ahead. Okay, we look at a couple more posters. Расти богатырь, grow hero. A bogatyr was the hero of a bylina, which is an old Slavic kind of folk epic. So anyway, rasti is an imperative from the verb rasti, which has kind of a funny infinitive, by the way. More on that type of thing later. But anyway, rasti means grow. Okay, we look at the next poster, biei. That is the imperative for beat. And this is to strike, right? So the slogan here reads, strike at the enemy of the Cultural Revolution, namely alcohol, right? So this is an anti-alcoholism poster. And as we're going to see in a moment, biei is a form that we would not be able to produce using the step-by-step method. So it's going to be one of those exceptions. So more on that in one moment. Biei, right? The imperative for beat. One more example from a very famous poster, dai kachestva. Dai is the imperative of dать, which we know is an irregular verb. And again, if we went through the step-by-step method, we would start out with dadut, but the imperative isn't daiji, right? So again, if we went down the step-by-step route, we'd end up with an incorrect form. The imperative is actually dai. Okay, so by the way, this poster has kind of a little play on words. Kachestva means quality, and this little expression vo, it's kind of related to vot as far as I know, right? Which we have seen kind of meaning here, right? You're showing something. So that the idea here is vo, right? Like, oh, that's it. That's the ticket. That's what I want, right? So it's like, again, kind of a play on words where someone's requesting quality, and right away they're like, oh yeah, there we go. That's what I want. Dai kachestvo. Okay. So here's a quick rundown of some exceptions, and this pretty much does it, I think, for a couple of verb types that don't work out using the step-by-step method, and then some other kind of weird examples. So Pete, just like beat that we saw in the poster, that's a soft sign verb. Okay, and you see these examples here, and you can look at them and realize why they would lead us down into a dead end. We just had to forget about the step-by-step method and basically memorize these, right? We'd get piei, meaning drink, or the vui form pietie, right? So again, notice that even with these weird exceptions, once we know the ti form, the vui form simply is created by adding tie. There's nothing weird going on, even with these unusual, exceptional forms. Okay, avai verbs like davat, they retain the avai, right? So this is another type we could say whose imperative is simply the stem of the vowel, right? Which is avai. So for example, davai. That's maybe the most common Russian imperative in a way. It means like, hey, let's do something. Of course, literally means to give, right? But it's also used in constructions meaning, hey, let's do this, let's do that. And we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. By the way, while we're on the topic, maybe the other most common imperative is the greeting здравствуйте. We may not have mentioned this, but that здравствуй, that's the ты imperative from the verb you don't really hear very much. Здравствовать. Здравствовать meaning to be healthy. Right? You don't normally hear that in other forms, but simply in the imperative здравствуй, which is now the standard greeting, right? And then we add the tie, we get the вы, the polite greeting, здравствуйте, that we learned back on God knows when, day 2 or something. Okay, this third item is an important one. If you have a consonant cluster, right? So let's say you go through the step-by-step method and you're left with a tricky cluster. Well, then you will add, in some cases, an unstressed E. Okay, so think of this as an exception. This is quite unusual, so it shouldn't keep you up at night. But look, for example, at pomnить. Okay, we go through the step-by-step, we would be left with pomn, and indeed we would get, because of the stress, pomny, right? That's what we would expect using the step-by-step method. Now, already that may strike you as a little bit hard to pronounce, and by the way, Russians are very intolerant of this MN cluster. They'll break that up. They'll do anything they can to break up that cluster. Keep in mind that it's not always predictable which clusters in a given language are regarded as somehow problematic. But anyway, if you see an MN in Russian, you can pretty much be certain that it's going to be broken up. Okay, so we don't get pomny, right, which would preserve the cluster. Instead, we're adding on an extra vowel to kind of break that up into a pomny, right, which is easier to say. Okay, pomny, pomните, right, remember. One more example, you get this sometimes with new verbs, right? Because of that N, you're more likely to get some kind of a cluster at the end of a word. Привыкнуть, right? Even though the stress on the ya form is привыкну, right on the stem, we don't say привыкни, right? Now that one you can really tell how hard that is to say, привыкни, right? So anyway, you can maybe understand why they're adding an unstressed E instead, and we get привыкни, right? Get used to something. Okay, finally, we have 3 irregular verbs. We know these verbs are totally irregular, and here too, if we went through the step-by-step method, we would not get the correct form. So we just have to learn them. There's really nothing else to say about it. Дай, дайте, that means give, perfective. Eat means eat will be ешь, ешьте, ешь, ешьте. And finally, be will be будь, будьте, right? Meaning to be, right? Okay, let's give a few irregular imperatives. Let's start with Pete. Okay, so again, we just have to know this. And by the way, we don't really have a whole lot of examples of some of these verbs. So anyway, let's just see if we can spit out these forms. Pie, right? You drink. The vui form would be pijte, pijte. Okay, the perfective, vypить, would give us vypij, vypij. Remember the vy, that prefix is, actually, I don't think we've talked about this yet. Vy is always stressed in perfective forms. Okay, so we'll talk more about that when we really talk about prefixes. Anyway, the stress is on the vy. Vypить gives vypij, and then the vypijte. Разбить, okay, that means to shatter, right? There's the prefixed form of beat, another soft sign verb, разбей, разбей, разбейте. Забыть, okay, that's, we haven't talked about this yet, that means to forget. That's a prefixed form of быть, right? See that быть there? That's a very familiar verb, hopefully, at this point. So the prefix isn't going to change the basic forms of this verb, right? So we're going to get, if быть gave us будь, then забыть gives us забудь, right? Forget. And then the V form would be забудьте. Мерзнуть. Okay, there's a new verb that's going to leave us with a tricky consonant cluster. So despite the verbs being stem stressed, we're going to add an unstressed E, and we're going to get мерзни, right? Freeze. Or вы не мерзни. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. I was about to say that it sounds kind of rude to tell someone, hey, go freeze, right? So maybe this is a good example to try negating, right? Не мерзни, right? Не мерзни. Don't freeze, right? Don't freeze to death. Or вы не мерзнете. Okay, now some avai verbs. Now here we're giving the full aspectual pair, right? Because again, we have some, these are our 3 examples of the possible avai verbs, right? For давать, we would get давай, right? That's the avai pattern. And then dать, irregular, gives us дай, right? So давай, дай would be the, so to speak, the imperative pair, right? The imperative aspectual pair for that verb. Продавать, продать, meaning to sell. Продавай, продай. Right, again, the prefixation doesn't change the underlying form. And I misspoke earlier. We only have really 2 verbs here, right? Давать, and then an example was вставать. So stop, right? We're telling someone to stop. That would be переставай for the avai verb, and then перестать That stem stress, if we remember, we saw it earlier, I believe. Перестану, that implies перестань, перестань. And the final пословица, будь друг, да не вдруг. Be a friend, but not suddenly. Meaning don't come out of nowhere and offer your friendship when it's somehow beneficial for you, right? By the way, we just saw the imperative for есть, meaning to eat, right, which is ешь, ешь, or the vui imperative would be ешьте. Now, if you're at a Russian family's house or whatever, and they're serving you food, you may hear a variation of that, which is built off the verb kушать, which is one of these, a lot of languages have kind of a set of words that they mostly use with children or even little babies and little kids, right? But sometimes they keep using them kind of, in other contexts as well. And this is one of those examples where you'll hear often the imperative кушай, кушай, right? So you may hear ешь, but you may hear more often кушай, or the V form would be кушайте, right? Again, meaning eat, eat, eat. Кушай, кушайте. Okay, so that's enough for today. Tomorrow we'll look more at the imperatives. Today we've learned how to form the imperative, which is kind of right the first thing, obviously. But now we need to talk more about how to use the imperative, how to choose aspect when you're using the imperative forms, and then we'll look again at a couple of other ways to give commands, including suggestions like, hey, let me do that, or let him do it, let her do it, let them do it, that type of, we'll also call that actually an imperative. For example, a third person imperative would be, hey, let him do that, or may he do that type of idea. Okay, so until next time, до свидания, товарищи.